All right, I've started the recording. Thank you everybody for joining today. My talk is about the 1936 Susan B. Anthony stamp. The yellow roses were a symbol of suffrage in the Tennessee State House when the 19th Amendment was passed. That's why I chose this for the cover slide. What we'll be talking about today is the timeline of the movement to get women access to suffrage in the United States, and then a brief Susan B. Anthony biography. I'll talk about the stamp, and then I'll demonstrate some usages of the stamp. The image that you can see here is a statue that is in the US Capitol. It was carved by Adelaide Johnson. She was a sculptor who was active at the time of the women's suffrage movement. The statue features Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. It is now back in the US Capitol. After a while, I think in 1921, the statue was removed from the US Capitol and put in storage for many, many years. It weighs 7 tons, and it was brought back into the Capitol in May 1997. The Army Corps of Engineers conducted a study to ensure the Capitol floor could support the statue before it was moved back up. Okay. The timeline that I wanted to share with you is, how many years it took to get women's suffrage to pass in the US Congress. The first convention was in 1848 in July in Seneca Falls, New York. And then it moved to the Senate in December of 1866. It was an amendment that was tacked onto a different bill to give the District of Columbia suffrage so that its vote would count in the US, and it did not pass there. In 1868, there was a universal suffrage bill, and that also did not pass the Senate. January 10th, 1878, now January 10th is my birthday, which caught my attention here. A California senator named Sargent, he proposed amending the Constitution. In June of that year, there were 30,000 petitions that were received in support of the amendment, and the Senate committee indefinitely postponed the matter. So if you look at these other events over time, basically there were different bills that went in and out of committee. Sometimes the committees were favorable, took a favorable position, and they still did not get passed by the full Senate. So, this persisted for a very, very long time, over 70 years. And then finally, in 1920, the amendment was added to the Constitution after Tennessee became the last state to ratify it. If you read my article in the American Philatelist, I related the story of Harry Burns, who was the last legislator in Tennessee to vote in favor of giving women the vote in Tennessee. That made Tennessee the last state out of the 3/4 needed to ratify the amendment. So that was a really critical thing. He passed it after receiving a letter from his mother. I believe he was in his 20s at the time, and she encouraged him to vote in favor of it. Susan B. Anthony was born February 15th, 1920 in Adams, Massachusetts. Her hometown long-term was Rochester, New York. And her notable accomplishments include lobbying for women's rights in New York State. When she first became active, women had very few rights, even though they were the mother of the children. If a woman became divorced, the custody of the children was often still granted to the father. She lobbied to change this. And then at the time, property rights also were mostly limited to men, and she had some success there as well. One notable event in her life was in 1874. She was put on trial for trying to vote in a presidential election. And I believe President Trump pardoned her this year for that, or during his presidency. She passed in March of 1906, and she's buried in Seneca Falls, New York. I pulled out this picture of her gravesite. I don't know if you saw it. CBS News had a story showing a lot of women going to the site, putting their I voted stickers on her gravestone. Over time, this caused damage to the gravestone, and so now the keepers of the cemetery put this plastic covering over it in order to protect it and still let Americans who vote show their support with this. So I'll go now to speaking about the stamp itself. I got these images from the Smithsonian. On the left side here is an image of Victor S. McCloskey, who is credited as being the designer of the stamp. I believe he's the one seated. And then on the right here is the bust that the stamp is based on. As I mentioned before, Adelaide Johnson carved it. There is a story that this bust made its way to the 1893 Columbian World Exhibition. So that's kind of a neat tidbit for Chicago collectors. Johnson was nicknamed the sculptress of the women's rights movement. And some history about McCloskey: he was a designer at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing from 1934 until 1965. And he attended the Corcoran Gallery School of Art. So the president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had actually sketched the design that he was looking to see. And this is a copy that I got when I was at the National Postal Museum. I had gone through and done some research using their files from the 3rd Assistant Postmaster General. And as you can see at the top, he marked in US postage, and then the border around the portrait. And then at the bottom, he put the 3 cents, her name, and suffrage for women. So I do want to do some further research. I haven't had a chance yet, but on the activities that took place to get the stamp created. I do want to point out that various locations throughout the country were lobbying to get the first day of issue. Laramie, Wyoming was among these. The postmaster asked to have the stamp issued there because Wyoming was the first state in the country to grant women suffrage, and that was in 1869. And Susan B. Anthony did travel there at one point. In response to the Wyoming request, the Post Office Department said that the stamp would be issued in Washington, D.C. because it commemorated an act of Congress. And South Adams, Massachusetts also wanted to be designated the site for the first day of issue because it was her birthplace. And I believe there were a few more. Key dates for the stamp: the stamp was first issued on August 26, 1936 in Washington, D.C. February 15, 1937, which was an anniversary of her birthday, New York State's governor declared it Susan B. Anthony Day, and so they requested additional stamps to be available for that, and the Post Office Department, I believe, promised to fulfill that. The images I have on this slide, The negative down at the bottom was in the collection at the National Postal Museum. I have to do further research on how such a negative would be used, but I just thought it was a really interesting contrast and image of the stamp that I had not seen before. And then the cover I show here, it's from 1946. So if you think about it, the stamp was issued in 1936, and 10 years later, people are still using it. It's a late usage example, and it, to me, it demonstrates how popular the stamp was. So ultimately, the Post Office Department stopped selling the stamp in 1945 when it was taken off the market. There were 9 total printings and 269 million stamps issued. And, you know, when people wrote letters to the Post Office Department in Washington, the Postmaster General, and said that they had wanted to see the stamp continue on, a lot of the response was that it was kept on the market longer than any other commemorative stamp. The stamp description that I give here is from the Post Office Bulletin, the Postal Bulletin from 1936, where the third Assistant Postmaster General, C.B. Eilenberger, introduced the stamp to the postal community, the postal workers. And there's a really nice description here of how the stamp looks. And I'm not going to read through the whole thing right now, but I like how it goes into the measurements of the stamp and the colors and the positioning of all the different features of it. It also points out at the bottom that the stamp was issued in sheets of 100. And I want to mention that collectors seeking first day covers were asked to send self-addressed stamped envelopes, and payment by cash or postal money order remittance, personal checks were not accepted. So it's just a little bit funny to me to see that the post office was actually calling for you to send them cash to get this done. These are some examples of proofs. This is actually the same proof, it's just the front and the back, and I blew it up in the middle a little bit to make it easier to view. This is the one in my personal collection. It's a trial color proof in deep lilac. It's a large die proof due to its dimensions. Those of you who may be new to proofs, in some cases they're worth more when they have the signature of the official approver. And then I wanted to mention the majority of the stamps that I have seen have been more of a magenta color, like a more reddish shade. And this then lives up to being a trial color. And the National Postal Museum has additional proofs and essays. I have not seen very many out there on the market. The one on the left here is an essay I acquired from Bill Langs prior to his passing. An essay is a test design. In this case, it's not the one that was ultimately selected, and I limited the enlargement so it doesn't go out of focus. And then on the right is a small die proof of the final design, and this is also part of my collection. And I acquired this one from Jim Lee. He advised that he thinks there's at most 3 of these out there. It's interesting to compare them and see how the design changed from the essay to the final design. And the final design more closely reflects what President Roosevelt had sketched. This is a full sheet. It's cut off because my scanner didn't have a large enough screen for me to scan the whole page in entirety. But you can see in the top right, it gives the plate number. There were 4 plates that were used to create the stamp. 12 21588, 21589, 21590, and 21591. I have also a sheet from 21590, which is the plate where the period is missing after the letter B in her name. So that's sort of one of the quirks of the stamp, that there are some out there where there's no period after the letter B. Some notable facts. Some Americans sought to make the stamp permanent. When I was at the Postal Museum, I found many letters from many women seeking to make the stamp permanent, and some had said that the postmaster had promised to do this, Mr. Farley. And I did find a 1937 letter that showed that the one postal official had said that 200 million copies were printed and it would be sold for an indefinite period. And then there were also some special events held around the country at the time of the stamp issuance. The Women's Club of Houston wanted to host a luncheon, so they sent a letter for extra stamps. Some of the letters that people wrote asking for the stamp to continue on, the response was that the stamp was produced so long as the plates were viable. And one of the women wrote back and said that the plates wearing out did not seem to be an issue for stamps featuring men, because those images were repeated many times over the years. I wanted to go into some examples of different usage, and I admit I'm still new to exploring rates and routes, so I'll do the best I can here. And as I noted before, some of these may be familiar if you read my article in the American Philatelist. This is a document I got from the National Postal Museum, the third Assistant Postmaster General's files. It talks about the number of covers and the number of stamps that were made available on the first day of sale. And then the Philatelic Agency, which took care of collectors, they had over 500,000 copies of the stamp. I wanted to show you some first day covers in my collection. These are from Robert Bazell. His first day covers are often described as scarce or rare. I looked in a 1986 issues of First Days, the Journal of the American First Day Cover Society, and they did mention that. The writers of that journal conducted a survey and found that only 5 to 8 of his designs for each issue were available from 1929 to 1937. And his images on these covers, these cachets, are photographic. And I was lucky to get them at a Harmer auction late last year. These are some first day covers from Crosby. He used a technique called thermography, which resulted in the raised type here. And his covers also often feature these photographs, these mini photographs on them. I like his first day covers because they're distinctive. They're different from other first day covers that I've seen. And in these two, I like the handwriting here. It's very flowery, and I just think it's very well done. There are a total of 3 Crosby covers for this issue, and they're all considered rare or scarce. I also got these at the auction last fall. These are the actual covers that appeared in the Malone Planty catalog from the 1990s. So that I thought that was a neat thing. There are numerous first day covers. First day covers for this stamp are plentiful. If someone goes out and decides they want to collect the stamp, that's one of the easier areas to collect. In fact, I think that's easier to find than the everyday usages. That being said, I think there's so many first day covers, and some of them are simply, you know, unflattering images of Susan B. Anthony, and it's hard for me to tell sometimes, you know, if that was the intent or if they were genuinely trying to commemorate her and her work. And so, you know, I steer away from the ones that I think are really not favorable to her, because that's not something that I want to be reminded of in my collection. This one caught my attention. It's some correspondence from the third assistant postmaster general. I think it's from C.B. Eilenberger. He sent it to an acquaintance or a friend he knew in Pennsylvania. And so it's kind of neat to have some official mail from the first day of issue showing the stamp. The stamp was also used on morning covers. For those who are new to the hobby, you can tell this is a morning cover by the black lines around the edges of the cover. This was mailed on the first day of issue for the stamp from Richmond, which is about 2 hours south of Washington. And you can see it went out late in the day. The timestamp, I believe, is 6 or 6:30 in the evening, which leads me to believe that the sender, you know, had to travel to go mail it. It's notable because it mentions Virginia did not pass the 19th Amendment, and part of me thinks that you know, perhaps the sender was expressing some sadness that the vote failed. And I do want to mention that Virginia ratified the 19th Amendment on February 21st, 1952. That was almost 32 years after the amendment and nearly 16 years after the stamp. And there are other examples. You know, if you do some research online, you can see how long it took some states to ratify the amendment. It's actually quite striking. This is a fire cover. This cover was damaged in the mail en route, I guess. You know, it has the stamp, the hand stamp on it saying damaged by fire and the date. This cover also caught my attention because I originally come from Virginia, and so I'm familiar with some of this history. In this case, the cachet commemorates the 350th anniversary of Virginia Dare. She was the first child of European descent born in the New World. That's recorded anyway. And then Roanoke Island was an early colony that disappeared. She was part of that colony. Someone named Governor White left the colony soon after Virginia Dare's birth. I believe he was her grandfather or a relative. He went back to England to get supplies, and I think there was some political unrest in England at the time, and it took him 3 years to get back to the New World, and by then the colony was abandoned. Some of the colonists, some people believe that the colonists went to live with a local Native American tribe, and it remains a mystery what truly happened. So this cover to me is interesting, not only because it had some fire damage, but the whole story behind Virginia Dare and the Roanoke Island disappearance. Here's an example of a foreign destination, and I have a feeling it may be my first exhibit that I do is going to be on foreign destinations. It's really quite fascinating how many different places around the world this stamp was used to mail. This cover is a first day cover. It was sent to someone in New York, and you can see that behind this tape here. And that person then covered it up and sent it to someone in Finland. The original postmark here on August 26th is from the first day of issue. And I imagine that the cover only had the 2 Susan B. Anthony stamps. And then when it was sent off to Finland, the sender added the 2 cent here and the 3 cent here. And then that person sent it out on September 5th. The 5 cents that was added was the surcharge for a letter UPU surface rate. And I don't believe it went to airmail, using airmail, because the airmail insignia is covered up. It may have used airmail to get from Washington to New York. One thing I do like about this cover is that the image of Susan B. Anthony in the cachet is looking at the image of Susan B. Anthony on the stamps. So they're sort of looking at each other. So that's kind of a cool effect. Here's a foreign destination to Palestine. It went in February of 1940. The 5 cent worth of postage here matches the Universal Postal Union rate for the first ounce of weight. And so I just thought that this one was interesting because it went all the way to Palestine. Here's a cover that went to Iran from New York City. And I believe it went to a school. This is the only cover I've seen to Iran using this stamp. The sender spent 12 cents in postage. And like I said, I'm still learning how to determine rates and routes, but at the time, there was a surcharge to send mail via Amsterdam that was 12 cents per half ounce. This cover really caught my attention. I think it's really fun because it has French on it and Russian. I actually sent an image of it to one of the staff in the APRL library because she knows some Russian. I'm hoping she can translate the front Russian information for me. But I studied French in college, and so I was able to figure out that the French information on the cover says that it was stalled in customs, and its contents was seen to be a bribe. So it's really an interesting story, and I may do some further exploration. You know, on the recipient and on the sender. This is some example of a Zeppelin cover using the stamp. It was flown on the Hindenburg, and it went from New York to Czechoslovakia in Bohemia. Czechoslovakia is also an unusual destination. I have not seen many covers going to this location using this stamp. And wanted to mention that Bohemia, the region of Bohemia switched between German and Czechoslovakian holdings around World War I. It was a German-speaking region, and I have an aunt who was born there. So it's interesting sometimes how these things come full circle. Here's an example of censored mail. This cover was going from New York to Germany, and you can see censored tape on the back. And it had 24 cents worth of postage from the Susan B. Anthony stamp and another 6.5 cents from other stamps. I was looking at Tony W.'s book on international rates, and it said that service was suspended from December 1941 to April 1946. So this was mailed, just over 6 months before that. So I think there's probably more research I can do on this cover. Here's another example of censorship. This cover went to Nigeria. It originated in Highland Park, Michigan, went to Detroit, and then from Detroit went over to Nigeria. Yeah, that's all I have on that one. This one went from New York City to Madrid, Spain. It was also censored in 1936. As I get more into collecting, I've started to try to get a better sense of when something is fake. So I took a double take here because the top seal was applied after the stamp and the cancel. But then, I looked at it a second time and I realized that the top seal was added because it was closing up what the censors had looked at. So the fact that the stamp and the cancel are covered up by that seal makes sense, and I do not think it's fake. I think the order of events makes sense here, but that's always something to look at. And if you're collecting and you see that a postal marking is obscured, maybe ask yourself why. If there's a good reason for it, or if it looks like somebody just did it to potentially create more interest than, or make the cover more special than it really is. I also have found many ship covers using this stamp, which I think is very interesting because, most sailors were men, and they used a lot of these stamps. So, it's sort of taught me to go and explore ship covers, and in doing so, if you look at the catalogs and the research on them, the covers are geared for people who are collecting ship covers, not the stamps on the ship covers. So sometimes when I look for covers like this, I end up searching for a time period and the type of cover as opposed to the stamp directly. And that has been one way that I've been able to get more of these. And this one is an example of a cover from a submarine. So I also have been looking into event covers or holiday covers with the stamp. This one is a Christmas cover. It was designed by the Universal Ship Cancellation Society, their Battleship Oregon chapter. So the cachet is for Christmas, and then it was sent from the USS Luzon, which was in Shanghai. If you are starting to get into ship covers, I encourage you to join the USCS. They are a very helpful group of collectors and can help you get started. Want to point out that the back cover has rubber stamps on it, and these include the mail clerk from the ship and the recipient of the cover and cachet director for the chapter, as well as where it was birthed. Another thing to look out for is hand-painted covers. There are less of these out there, so that makes them, I think, a more desirable collectible. This one commemorates Columbus Day, and so it has significance for the holiday as well as the hand painting and the postmark on the stamp that I collect. I'm not overly familiar with the artist or the or ANCS. I have to do further research on that. So just want to mention again that the stamp came out in August and this postmark was in October, so it wasn't much later than that. The stamp was also used on registered mail. This is kind of an interesting cover. The sender sent it from Massachusetts to Russia or the Soviet Union, and it was returned from Moscow back to the United States. And then I think when they sent it to the return address, the person had moved. So there was a bit of a activity determining, you know, where this person moved to. And if we look at the back, there's a bunch of different postmarks on it. And the earliest one is October 19th, 1937, and the latest is February 18th, 1938, apologies. So as far as I can tell, it went through New York on the way to Russia and Boston on the way back. And if you'll notice, the Susan B. Anthony stamp is here. It's not the most prominent, but it's still quite interesting that it was among those that was used. And then here's an unusual use. This was used on a document. If you see here, it was used to pay the fee on the document. It actually should have gone in this box down here. I give some credit to Labor and Harris here. He explained this to me. It's a post office certificate of mailing. And this is the only document I've found to date where the stamp is used in this way. So that wraps up my covers for the Susan B. Anthony stamp. I just wanted to highlight, you know, the stamp that was issued this year, commemorating 100 years of women voting. On the right is a full mint sheet, and the stamp was issued on August 22nd, 2020, which is a few days before the other stamp was issued. And the colors on the stamp are the same colors that were used in the women's suffrage movement. And if you look closely, something that I think is neat is that they have included African American women in here. The colors are from the National Woman's Party, purple, white, and gold. And it was designed by art director Ethel Kessler using art by Nancy Stahl. And I think Jeff Stage may have written an article in the AP about this, announcing that the stamps issue and so forth. I believe they still have copies of this on the US Postal Service website if you still want to order some. I want to mention that the current situation for voting in the US remains fragile. Some people want to make it difficult to vote, and I don't think voting rights should ever be taken for granted. There were newspaper articles that I found in my research that talked about potentially rescinding women's vote in the early 20th century. Fortunately, that did not come to pass, but I just don't think we should ever take it for granted. I want to thank Cheryl Gons, Labor and Harris, Tim Waite, and Doug Weiss for helping me with material and research. I have a slide of some of my sources. I pulled information from the US Postal Service, the US Senate, the US House. The Virginia Dare information came from NCpedia, and then the Postal Museum. I was really fortunate last fall to be able to spend a lot of time there conducting research. And also want to mention they have a great website if you want to, run searches there for what you collect. It's a great resource. So thank you, everybody. I'm glad to have been able to speak with you today and open to answering questions.
Let's see. I should unmute everybody.
Thank you.
I'm here.
Fantastic.
Terrific. Thank you.
Very informative. Yeah, a lot of good information, historical stuff in there. Yeah.
Are there any reentries done for the missing period after initial?
I'm not familiar with that term, Larry. Can you help me out? What do you mean by reentry?
It's where they go back with the, you said the plates were wearing out from time to time.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know if there was something that they would do is go back and try to re-engrave parts of the plate to make what we call the re-entry. And when they did further issuances of the stamp.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, and nobody, like in the correspondence, the postal officials really were pretty insistent upon the fact that the plates had worn out, and they didn't offer to, create new plates or fix.
Repair them.
Yeah.
Just be on the lookout for that. If that does pop up, then you know it's your. That's a big deal in Canada. Canadian issues. Trying to fight to get the re-entry copies of certain stamps.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look out for that.
I have
Yeah.
a question then. Melanie, you said that they ended the printing in 1945. So does that mean that they used those same plates for 9 years?
That's my perception. There were only 4 plates used, so I probably should do more research into that, Eric.
Thanks.
And look at your first day covers and see what plate number is on those if you have any with plate numbers.
Okay.
Because that way you'll see if maybe only one plate was used up front and maybe they didn't make the other plates till later. I know there's also, like in my 1968 era, there's postal records that the postal bulletins tell you about when all the plates went to press and all that kind of information. I'm not sure if that's available from the 1930s or not. They're postal bulletins.
Okay.
Where they actually tell you when they put them to press, what days they were run. It's very interesting to dig all that up.
This is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
If you look on the National Postal Museum site, they have the certified plate proofs for quite a few issues. I don't know what they have for Susan B. Anthony, but they're easy to blow up. And if they have them, they give the date that they were approved, each plate.
Okay, great.
So it's worth looking at those.
Thank you.
Were these ever issued in pre-canceled form with the cities on them or anything?
I have not come across that, Larry, no.
Whoever's got your radio on, we can hear it very loudly in the background. If you could shut that off, that'd be great.
You know, on the 50 cent Susan B. Anthony, it exists, so pre-cancels.
Okay.
Those can be fun to take after two of the different cities.
I would just like to make a word about black bordered envelopes. They're not mourning envelopes in the most of them. They're meant for women to use for mail. And if you look at the contents of black bordered envelopes, you'll find that most of them are just ladies using the black borders. And the stationery itself is often black bordered also. It was a custom to use the black borders. The women did that. Now, that's not taking away that black borders also means mourning, but the numbers of black bordered envelopes that have mourning in the letters is very small.
Jim, do you know why they, why women use
It
black
was style. It's stylish. It looked nice.
Okay.
I think it was just nice. You know, envelopes themselves didn't exist until the 1840s. And prior to 1840s, you can find stampless covers that people have written black with ink around the address. So the mourning aspect of it goes back to stampless covers before envelopes. So there's mourning letters prior to envelopes. They're not very common at all.
I'd like to add to that, in Europe, they still use the black bordered envelopes and stationery to announce deaths because my family uses those. I used them when my husband died to notify people in Europe. But now I use my leftover black bordered envelopes if I send cash to someone in Europe, because I figure no one's going to think there's money in a letter that's announcing a death.
That's a good.
So that's how,
pretty
as a
smart.
woman, I'm using one.
One of the possibilities that that black border, the sender was mourning the failure of Virginia to ratify the amendment.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That was what I thought.
Yeah.
Me too.
I have a black bordered Lincoln envelope, and there's a couple of others shown with black borders. There's one from the Department of State, I think, a black bordered envelope from the Department of State after Lincoln died, you know. Len Pearson gave me a letter that somebody drew a black border on the, it's a postmarked envelope with a stamp and address, but then somebody outlined with ink over the, about a quarter of an inch away from the edges of the envelope, a black rectangle on it. And it's postmarked the day after Lincoln died. It's very interesting.
Hmm.
It didn't have Susan B. Anthony, though. I didn't see the beginning of your thing. Did you sell some letters from Susan B. Anthony, too?
No, I don't have any of her correspondence.
Oh, yeah, there is something for you to collect. They're not expensive.
I did see some in Omaha at that show. There was some folks selling ephemera and they had a letter. I think it was from her sister to her. Yeah.
I was wondering about that letter to Iran. I wonder if the sender was trying to make a statement. You know, in Iran, women's rights hardly exist. So,
Yeah, I wish I had the letter that was in it.
yeah, could have been a statement.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it have the black below it? You know, the big black things? On the lower two
Canceling the
stamps.
stamps that didn't get canceled by the machine.
These.
Some kind of a obliterator or something probably.
It's a cancel.
Yeah.
But do you think that was here in Iran that was put on there?
I don't know.
I'd say it was US. Somebody spotted that the stamps weren't canceled. They're just doing revenue protection.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree that it's US. I have found letters in the Third Assistant Postmaster General file to postmasters telling them when they do first day covers that they have to obliterate every stamp even if the machine doesn't reach it.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Melanie, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I think one of the most intriguing parts of your talk was talking about the enduring popularity and importance of the stamp at the time. You know, looking back, it's kind of a humble stamp. And I'm wondering how you square the actual importance and popularity of the stamp with like the philatelic importance, which may not be as bolstered in your exhibit, although you do a great job bringing together all these elements.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the stamp itself in a philatelic context is, you know, it's kind of ordinary.
Just another 3-cent purple stamp like they all were back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it really was remarkable to me to learn how many were printed, and especially in comparison to other issues of the time. I mean, this, you know, was like 10 or 20 times as many. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting fact.
It really
You
resonated
think
with
women
people.
used it a lot after they got the vote, and so they wanted to show support by using the stamp?
Yes, I can
Are a lot of uses from ladies?
I can confirm that because in the Catherine Manning collection and papers at the Smithsonian, she was a curator of the Philatelic collection at the time this came out. And there are many women stamp collectors and friends of hers who wrote letters to her encouraging all their friends to use this stamp.
Oh, that's good. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, sure.
Melanie, do you know, generally speaking, what happened during the Great Depression in terms of the numbers of philatelic collectors? Was this considered a more affordable hobby than others, and therefore the numbers went up? Did they go down because there was less spending money? Did they remain about the same? I mean, relative to the other periods, for example, if this stamp had come out in a period when there wasn't a Great Depression, what would you have expected to have seen with the popularity of the stamp?
Yeah, that's a good question, Susan. I'm not familiar with you know, how many people were collecting at the time, but
not either. Yeah,
I think the stamp, a lot of its popularity was because, you know, the cause resonated with so many women. So
There were more stamp collectors in the 1930s than there has ever been before or after because of Franklin Delano Roosevelt being a collector, King George.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, the publicity was just off the charts. We had radio shows and all kinds of things out there, national radio shows. Captain Tim, you know, that really publicized stamp collecting at that point. And it was, like you mentioned, it was an affordable thing to do during the Depression.
Right.
Because you could just get stamps off old letters from, you know, the business down the street or wherever. So it was a neat, fun way to forget about your troubles for a little bit. Kind of similar to what we're having now, where people are stuck at home and pulling up their collections.
In the Kelleher sale, I just bought an envelope, a Civil War ship cover, and it has a red hand stamp on it from the Franklin Delano Roosevelt collection, and they put that red hand stamp on the front of the envelope.
On the front. Usually it's on the back. Yeah.
I have an express cover with it on the back, but this is
Yeah.
the first time I've seen it on the front of the envelope.
It's kind of distracting, yeah.
Melanie, I was interested in the cover to Spain from 1936 that was censored.
Sure.
I think if you do some research on that, was censored in Spain as part of the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,